This is Nick Vardaxis, and we're continuing the lectures on European health history, considering in this lecture Roman and Byzantine times, which overlap with the Middle Ages and also the period of influence of the Arab Empire. Now, the rise of Rome is an interesting story because from a very insignificant little settlement in the site that present-day Rome is found in, that little insignificant settlement gave rise to the most powerful and the most extensive ancient civilization. Now, somewhere around 900 to 800 BC, the Italian peninsula was settled by a very mysterious people called the Etruscans. We know a lot about the Etruscans, but we don't know much more about them. In fact, we know very little compared to what we don't know about them. Archaeologists and various historians suspect that the Etruscans came from the eastern Mediterranean, possibly Asia Minor, through Greece. There are many elements to the Etruscan civilization that are both Eastern as well as Greek. They were a very sophisticated people with a highly advanced culture. They had an alphabet based on the Greek alphabet, a very powerfully original sculptural and painting tradition, so highly developed art, a religion that was based on human-type gods, which they had adopted from the Greeks, and a complicated set of rituals for divining the future, which were actually adopted by the Romans afterwards. Unlike most civilizations of the time, the Etruscans were very egalitarian, so women had a very high place in society, and they enjoyed their life as men did. Now, while the Etruscans were very busy building their power over Italy and becoming effective traders with the East and with Africa, the city to their south began to grow rather large. And this city, which became Rome, imitated the Etruscans in many ways. And conflicts started to develop between the Etruscans and the developing city of Rome, which was inhabited by the Latins. Now, here we actually see the civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean around about the 6th century BC. We can see the Greek civilization in pink, and you can see there that as well as in Greece, the Greek civilization extended on the shores of Asia Minor as well as on the shores of the Black Sea, going well into the east. As well as that, we had very important Greek colonies on the Italic Peninsula as well as in Sicily. These Greek colonies were very, very important large cultural centers and strongholds of Greek civilization and language on the Italic Peninsula. And we then have Etruria, the stronghold of the Etruscans, to the middle of Italy there, and slightly to the south of the Tiber River, Rome and Latium, which is the stronghold of the Latins, the subsequent Romans. Now, here we see the Etruscan civilization strongholds with the various towns and cities that were very important in the Etruscan civilization. Etruria, around 750 BC, had many important cities such as Veii and Tarquina and Vetluna, Clevson, Perusia, Phalathri, Arretium, Cortun, Felsina, etc. And then to the south of that, the Latins and that very small town of Rome, which grew to be the very large cosmopolis of Rome. Here is an artist's interpretation of what a typical Etruscan banquet looked like. You can see there a little barbecue type of arrangement. This was in fact a heater, a portable heater, a brazier, where coals were burnt for warmth. They were very musical people, a people that enjoyed life very much. And you can also see how women were included in the festivities and the banquets, and they have a very important role to play in Etruscan society. Here's an actual wall painting, a fresco from an Etruscan tomb that shows you a scene from a banquet. Women were traditionally depicted as being very fair-skinned, that white skin, whereas men were depicted with the brown skin. And you can see there a tender, intimate moment where the man is about to feed his partner that morsel of food. So we get the impression from these remnants, from these wall paintings, from the art that we have found, that they certainly enjoyed life and they lived a very rich and fulfilling life. Now, Rome was actually founded by agrarian Italic peoples, the Latins, that were living south of the Tiber to the south of Etruria and the Etruscans. They were a tribal people that started off as nomads and then settled in that fertile land. That logic of tribal organization dominated Roman society and the development of Roman civilization. So it was almost based on clans and chiefs and fiefdoms and so on and so forth. So that type of organization was translated and magnified to the arrangement of the Roman Empire later on. Now, archaeologists believe Rome was founded around about 750 BC, although before that it existed as a small village settlement in even Neolithic times. Now, as the Romans steadily developed their city and as their city grew, its government and its culture imitated the Etruscans, and there was quite a bit of rivalry between the Etruscans and the Latins. The Etruscans saw the power of Rome growing, and they took over the government of Rome. And of course the Latins were very resentful of this, and they wanted to overthrow the Latins. Now, this is a very famous a statue that you see there, a very famous sculpture. It relates to the mythology of Rome. And mythologically, Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, the two twins that were abandoned in the woods and were found by the she-wolf, and they were suckled by the she-wolf until they grew, and they then together lay down the foundations of Rome. And that's why the wolf and Romulus and Remus are still the emblem of Rome, modern-day Rome. Now, Rome went through a development from a typical monarchy, where you had a king, to a republic, where you had a senate looking after government, and there was no king. The Etruscan monarchs ruled Rome from the mid-6th century onwards, and finally, when an Etruscan prince of the Etruscan family that ruled Rome, the Tarquins, raped Lucretia, the wife of a Roman patrician, the Romans rose up in revolt, so it was a good excuse to overthrow the Etruscans, and they threw Tarquins out of power, out of Rome, so Etruscan influence in Rome stopped in 509 BC. Junius Brutus was the Roman who actually overthrew the Tarquins, and gradually, as Rome became independent and more powerful, they started incursions to the north into Etruscan territory, and they took over the Etruscan civilization. Now, once they got rid of the Etruscan king, the Latins, the Romans, dismantled the institution of monarchy, and they set up the Republic. SPQR is an acronym which is quite familiar to anyone familiar with Roman history, but to anyone who even visits Rome today. Even today in Rome, if you go and look at the manhole covers, you will see SPQR on them, which is a symbol of Rome, but it actually stands for Senatus Populusque Romanus, which actually means the Senate and people of Rome. Now, the Republic of Rome, from a regional power, gradually became an empire. And that's because the Romans were very warlike and they liked to extend their territory at every opportunity. So the conquest of the whole of Italy through the 4th and the 3rd centuries followed the overthrow of the Etruscans by the Latins, the Romans. Now, it becomes very much in the subsequent years a history of various wars, where finally the Romans raised themselves into a very powerful force in the central Mediterranean area. And gradually they expanded westwards, eastwards, northwards, and southwards, so that the Roman Empire encompassed the whole of the Mediterranean Sea. In fact, in the Roman Empire, the Romans referred to the Mediterranean Sea as Mare Nostrum, which means our sea in Latin. So they were very possessive about the Mediterranean Sea. In 387 BC, the Gauls, the ancient inhabitants of France, attacked and sacked Rome. They burnt it to the ground, subsequently returning to France with all of the booty of the battle, and Rome was vulnerable until about 350 BC, when it re-established itself. In 295 BC, the Romans fought with the Samnites, whom they overthrew in 280 BC. Greek cities of Italy were then defeated, all the Greek colonies that we saw before in the map, and by 250 BC, Rome controlled all of the Italian peninsula. The Punic Wars then followed, and there were several Punic Wars, 264 to 241 BC, 218 to 202 BC, 149 to 146 BC. The Punic Wars related to a rival empire to the south of Rome on the coast of Africa, the Carthaginian Empire. So Carthage was a very important city in northern Africa, and in the Punic Wars between 264 and 146 BC, finally Rome defeated Carthage and burnt Carthage to the ground and expanded its empire to the west and the south. Following this, we had the defeat of the Hellenistic East, the empire left by Alexander the Great to his generals, and this occurred between 200 and 168 BC, where the Romans annexed and expanded the Hellenistic Empire and added it to the Roman Empire. Now, this was an interesting annexation, if you like, because the Romans tended to adopt wholesale the good points of any civilization that they took over. And in subduing the Hellenistic East, they were in awe of the Greek culture and language and art, and they adopted all of these to the extent that if you were noble, it was expected that as well as speaking Latin, you had to speak and read and write Greek, which became the language of literature and culture and art. And also they brought over many slaves, Greek slaves, to Rome in order to contribute to their culture. Obviously, medical doctors were also imported wholesale from the Hellenistic East into Rome. A period of crisis followed this annexation of the Hellenistic East until Julius Caesar, the famous Julius Caesar, stabilized the empire by about 45 BC. Now, here is Rome at the peak of its development, and you can see there ancient Rome, which was referred to as a cosmopolis, a cosmopolitan center. A cosmopolis means world city in Greek, so the prime city of the world at that time, the largest, the most splendid, the richest, the most populous, where you could find the most culture, the most civilization, the most art, the most entertainment and diversion, and also, of course, the most corruption. Now, here we see the Roman Empire at around about 100 AD, and you can see how it encircles all of the Mediterranean Sea, or Mare Internum. Mare Internum means the internal sea, as opposed to the oceans to the west. And also, as I said, the Romans did call the Mediterranean Sea Mare Nostrum, our sea, and you can see why there. It's completely surrounded by Roman territory, which extended way up into Britain and France and Spain and Greece and Asia and Egypt. From republic, then Rome grew into an empire, and an empire, of course, is a glorified monarchy where you have an emperor being very all-powerful, governing that empire and having absolute powers. Julius Caesar was actually a dictator rather than emperor, and he was appointed a dictator by the Senate. But of course, he had it very clearly in his mind to become an emperor, and that's why he was assassinated. Because the Senate could actually see that the power of the Senate in that republic type of government was being taken over by a single person, and the plot to assassinate Caesar was in fact to try and preserve the empire, to preserve the republic. But instead, what eventuated with the death of Caesar, the murder of Caesar, was a period of crisis and civil war where successors of Caesar fought with each other in order to try and establish a power base. And after that civil war, which lasted for 13 years, Augustus was appointed imperator, which means emperor, and he was the first of a long line of very corrupt emperors that followed, or largely corrupt emperors that followed. Everyone knows about the excesses of Tiberius and Caligula and Nero and the subsequent emperors. But also there were some very, very good and cultured emperors that did a lot of good to the empire. For example, Claudius and Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius and so on. Now, Roman literature followed on from Greek literature, so they used a lot of the Greek literary models, but of course Roman literature used the Latin language, and the golden age of Roman literature was between 50 BC and 50 AD, and its main proponents were Virgil and Horace, Ovid and Seneca. The Silver Age between 50 and 150 AD, Lucan and Tacitus and Juvenal, and a lot of elegant writing occurred, which, as I said, was a development of Greek philosophy and Greek drama and Greek poetry, but also there was quite a great deal of elegant use of language, and a lot of these authors and poets and dramatists of the Golden Age and Silver Age of Roman literature use Latin very elegantly, and students of Latin will often go back to these classic authors in order to see how glorious that ancient Latin tongue was. Architecture also flourished with the Romans. As you can see, there is a resemblance from the illustration to the Greek architecture, but also Romans developed the arch, and they were also very important in developing domes and developing the use of concrete. And concrete, which is very strong, made it possible to build these enormous domes on top of buildings, and they used arches to support the weight of these various buildings. There were numerous magnificent buildings built in Rome during imperial times, especially after Nero destroyed Rome by burning in order to clear some land in which he built a magnificent palace that sprawled over acres that he commandeered. Now, Roman medicine was actually a broad mixture of all sorts of things. There were new theories and developments of Greek practices. There were indigenous practices of the Etruscans and the Latins, various admixtures of supernatural practices and thoughts and philosophies with empirical practices. And then as Rome expanded its power base and it took over the Hellenistic Empire, it imported wholesale Greek medicine. And in fact, many of the famous Roman doctors and physicians that we know about, and also scientists and investigators and philosophers, were in fact of Greek origin, Greeks that had migrated to Rome because that was the center of power, and that's where they could have a good career and earn lots of money. Medicine was improved through the studies of Galen, a Greek doctor who practiced in Rome, through a desire to maintain a very fit and healthy army and also heal injured warriors, but also through empirical observation. Medicine in ancient Rome also brought about some very great developments in public health. Certainly, Rome was much more committed to public health works than any Greek city was, and that's something that the Greeks themselves recognized. Strabo, the famous Greek geographer, said, and I quote, "The Greeks are famous for their cities, and in this they aimed at beauty. The Romans excelled in those things which the Greeks took little interest in, such as the building of roads, aqueducts, and sewers." This is perhaps a little unfair. Strabo admired the Romans greatly, and in the second quote you can see there that he said, "Water is brought into the city through aqueducts in such quantities that it is like a river flowing through the city. Almost every house has cisterns and water pipes and fountains." And we know, of course, that many areas of Greece are very arid and water deficient, and Greeks had to be very frugal and economical in terms of water, whereas the Romans lived in a land which was very much endowed with lots of water, and their public works made sure that that water was available to their big cities. Now, as the Roman Empire expanded into Greece, as we've said, many doctors were attracted to Italy and Rome as the new center of power. Some of them had no choice in the matter because they were prisoners of war and they were slaves. They were bought by wealthy Romans to work in a household, but also many Greeks actually moved into Rome because they thought they were going to become rich and famous. And certainly we know many of them by name who did that and who did become the doctors of emperors. Now, these doctors became very valuable to Roman society, and a number of Roman slaves were able to buy their freedom and set up their own practices in Rome. After 200 BC, there were more Greek doctors in Rome than there were native Roman practitioners, but the Romans were rather mistrustful of these Greeks, and especially because they were very, very successful as practitioners, a lot of Greek writers were very acrimonious of this. For example, Pliny, the famous historian, wrote, "I pass over many famous physicians' men, like Cassius, Calpurnius, Aruntius, and Rubrius. 250,000 sesterces were their annual incomes from the emperors. There is no doubt that all of these physicians, in their hunt for popularity by means of some new idea, did not hesitate to buy it with our lives. Medicine changes every day, and we are swept along on the puffs of clever brains of the Greeks, as if thousands of people do not live without physicians, though not, of course, without medicine." So Pliny is very admonishing there and is rather caustic of these Greeks who came in and made enormous incomes. 250,000 sesterces was an enormous annual income. So these Greek doctors were certainly the millionaires of the day, so very successful in their practice. Pliny also remarked in his writings that when Thessalus, a famous Greek doctor, walked around in public in Rome, he attracted so many people in the streets that cheered him that the crowd attracted by his presence in public events in the street was a greater crowd than any which attended the famous actors and chariot riders based in Rome. So ancient Greek doctors had fans, not only the actors and the chariot riders and the sports people. Now, as we've said, the Romans were a warlike people, and almost all of Roman history is a history of battles and conquests, so an efficient army had to be maintained, and it was a very large army and a very efficient army. So obviously after each battle there were a lot of wounded and injured soldiers, and a lot of these had to be treated on the battlefield, but also a lot of them were taken back into dedicated camps and barracks, and a very important structure in that camp or barracks was the valetudinarium. We can see there in the picture a reconstruction of a barracks of Rome, and in the center there we have around the courtyard a valetudinarium. A valetudinarium was a military hospital, and valetudinarium actually means a goodbye building. Vale means goodbye in Latin, and a valetudinarium is the place that you say goodbye to your soldiers. That is, your soldiers are wounded or injured, so you put them in there and you say goodbye to them. Fortunately, a lot of these soldiers not only did not die, but they were looked after very, very well and were able to return to the battle. So it wasn't a final goodbye, it was only a temporary we'll see you again. And what was actually done in these military hospitals or valetudinaria was that you had very good accommodation, you had good doctors that looked after these soldiers. They were able to eat good food, exercise well as being treated, and also stroll around the courtyard, work out in gyms and build up their strength, and when they were healed they were able to return to the battles. Remember also that the ancient Romans liked their entertainment, and gladiatorial games were very, very popular. The gladiators were trained for the entertainment of the crowds. They had to be very healthy, very fit, and they were prepared for the battles that took place in the Colosseum and the various other arenas around Rome. And contrary to popular belief, not many of these gladiators were killed. They were too precious to be killed. A lot of them were injured and wounded, however. So once again, in the gladiatorial schools, we found that there were good doctors that were perhaps military doctors that looked after the injured gladiators as well. Now here we see some Roman surgical instruments, and these were recovered from Pompeii, the famous city in central Italy, which was engulfed by the eruption of Vesuvius, the volcano, and it's remarkably well preserved. If you ever go there, you'll be surprised at both the extent of the city and the remarkable preservation of the buildings and works of art, and even the people that were engulfed by ash. So both Pompeii and Herculaneum have been excavated, and we found some amazing archaeological artifacts. In the center top there you can see a bleeding cup where you collected the blood that you were bleeding from the patient, and that's obviously a measured quantity. 1 cup of blood to be bled from this patient, or 2 cups depending on the disease. We have various other instruments below the cup. We have a saw which was used for amputations. We can see there various probes and forceps and scalpels, even a little ladle where you could actually heat various creams and unguents so that you wouldn't apply them cold to the skin. Cornelius Celsus was a Roman who was very important in the history of Roman medicine because Cornelius Celsus was quite an important writer on medicine. He lived between 25 BC and 50 AD, so a rich and long life for those days. He was a Roman noble, a patrician. He appears to have studied medicine as something of interest, as a branch of general knowledge, as many other nobles did. Because all of these nobles had lots and lots of slaves to do all of the work, they could lounge around all day and go to the games and go to the baths and go to the library and discuss things with their friends and have banquets. But also some of them were very keen thinkers and students, and they were able to indulge in various kinds of learning and knowledge. Whether or not he was a practicing physician is controversial. It seems that he was probably an amateur physician, and he treated his family and friends, but he certainly enjoyed writing about medicine. He actually compiled one of the first medical encyclopedias. And his work, De Medicina, was one of a series of books intended to embrace all knowledge. So that was only a chapter, if you like, a very long chapter of general knowledge of an encyclopedia. So this was the medical part of the encyclopedia. It wasn't meant for physicians, so perhaps this is the first home doctor book that we can think of. And it was little read by Celsus, so it was mainly the nobles and the students of learning that read Celsus's encyclopedia. It's a compilation. He didn't write anything original. It's an anthology, if you like, bits and pieces from all over the place where he compiled it into the single work. There you can actually see a copy of De Medicina by Cornelius Celsus, published in Paris in 1566. So just how influential his work is tells you how it survived well into the Renaissance. Now, scholars have actually traced a large number of passages in Cornelius Celsus's work to Greek originals, and they were actually translated from the Greek to Latin. Remember how Greek became a language of learning in Rome, and all nobles spoke fluent Greek as well as Latin. The whole body of medical literature belonging to the Hippocratic and Alexandrian times is very well summarized, and a knowledge of the state of medicine and science up to and during the times of Celsus is given in this work. So if you actually have the time and interest, it's quite a good work to read because it summarizes all of ancient Greek and Roman medicine. Dioscorides is a very important personage to us, and he's another of these Greeks who did well in Rome. His full name is Pedanius Dioscorides. He lived between 40 and 90 AD, so somewhere in that period of time. He's the author of a 5-volume encyclopedia about herbal medicine and related medicinal substances. So this is in fact one of the first great herbal pharmacopoeias, and just how well people thought of Dioscorides is an indication of the 1,000 plus years of use. It's a fantastic book to delve into and read, especially an illustrated edition. And once again, I recommend to you to go and find a copy of Dioscorides because it gives us some valuable insights into ancient Greek and Roman medicine. He was born in Asia Minor, and Dioscorides was a Greek physician, a pharmacologist, and botanist. And he left his native Greece and went to Rome at the time of Nero. And he was one of these medical doctors with the emperor's army. He travelled all over the Roman Empire, and we can tell that from his writings because he describes certain plants that only grow in certain parts of the Roman Empire. And we know that he actually saw these specimens because he describes them very, very precisely. Now, this is a Byzantine copy of Dioscorides, which is illustrated. This is in fact a cyclamen, and you can see there that it's a little fanciful, but we can see the corm of the cyclamen down the bottom and the little rootlets, as well as the strange inverted bloom of the cyclamen, and it's written in Greek here. The books of Dioscorides, De Materia Medica, of medical materials, comprise one book on plant materials, one book on all manner of animals, one book on all manner of oils, another on all materials derived from trees, and finally on wines and minerals and other similar substances. So it's quite a comprehensive pharmacopoeia. It describes nearly 5,000 medical uses of these substances, and it's a very important work because we know that it's compiled from the author's own experiences, and the author was actually a practicing physician of the Hippocratic school. And it's a very good book to look into because it's very well organized and codified and is very rational, very modern in its approach.